Okay, so we're starting a new series tonight. It's called Jewish Mysticism. For those of you who saw the flyer, I'm going to give you an idea of what we're going to cover Bezrat Hashem during the following 7 weeks or so. Music, the language of the soul. It has to do with mysticism as well. It is related to the Kabbalah. Numerology, amulets or kimiot. Alternative healing, according to the Kabbalah. The impure forces, kochot tum'ah, witchcraft, the evil eye, ayn hara. And tonight we'll be covering spirituality, the fifth dimension, which is really more of an introduction to the whole series. And last but not least, a very important topic, human anatomy and chiromancy according to the Kabbalah. Many of you probably would not understand what the word chiromancy means.
Will you repeat this sentence again?
The last one?
The last sentence that you just said.
Human anatomy and chiromancy according to the Kabbalah. Chiromancy are the lines in the hand, more popularly known as palmistry. I'm not going to give you an in-depth lecture about every one of these topics, but just an overview of what they all are about so that we can better understand this complex world. This is a very complex world that we live in, and we don't live long enough to be able to appreciate all that there is to see and to learn. But Jewish mysticism opens a window into this beautiful, complex world and enables us to understand a lot of the complexities. Without knowing mysticism, without being knowledgeable about certain mystical areas that exist, the mystical knowledge, many people have many questions that go unanswered. Many people have a difficult time understanding what is going on. They can't make sense. They have a hard time believing in God. They have a hard time understanding what is expected of them. So I therefore decided to spend a few weeks to clarify this area. Mysticism, of course from the Jewish perspective. But tonight is going to be more about spirituality. What is spirituality? It is a term that you're probably familiar with, but maybe did not think too much into it. Ruchaniut in Hebrew. What does it come from? The root of the word spirituality is from the word spirit. We're talking about a spirit. We're used to talking about the physical body, whether we want to eat something, we want to enjoy ourselves, we want to go somewhere. It's all about the physical body. But who talks about the spirit? Spirituality deals with the spirit, or what we call the neshama, the soul. This I called the fifth dimension. Why the fifth? Most of us are familiar with 3 dimensions. We see things in 3D. The length, the width, the depth. Scientists tend to use the 4th dimension to describe time. So therefore I decided to use the 5th dimension to describe spirituality, even though it is very possible that there are many additional dimensions. But this 5th dimension of spirituality is very different than what we're used to seeing and experiencing. The reason for that is because the mind, the sechel, is only able to process what it sees, what it experiences, and that is in 3D. That's all that the mind can process. The eyes cannot see more than what is physically possible. Physically meaning what we experience in life while we are awake. When we're asleep, it is a little bit of a different experience, and there's a whole lecture about that called dreams. It's not completely physical. It is actually related to spirituality too, but we've already covered that. So for those of you who want to know a little bit more about dreams, I'll give you the information later where you can hear the lecture about that. But here, in this world, we are more accustomed to seeing that which is physical because we have physical eyes. However, even in the physical world, even when we experience physicality, not everything is visible. There's a lot of things that exists in the physical world that we cannot see. Unless, of course, you use a special machine that enables you to see where the eyes cannot see. For those of you who studied physics, there's something called the electromagnetic spectrum. The electromagnetic spectrum basically covers a range, all the ranges of frequencies of different kinds of radiation. Radiation, heat, energy. Light is one of them, visible light. It just happens to be that visible light is the only one that we could see. We see light. But there's more. In the past 200 years or so, they have discovered microwaves, radio waves, gamma rays, ultraviolet, infrared. There's a lot more. Different wavelengths. And for the most part, without special tools, you cannot see them. We only can detect some of it through very, very special machinery, telescopes, and the like. There's even very, very small particles. The smallest particle of all. The smallest actual unit of matter that we call an atom, which we know exists because everything is made up of atoms, and that cannot be seen by the naked eye as well. Even with very powerful microscopes, they're barely getting there now where they can see atoms. So what do we see from all of this? That there's a lot in this physical world that the physical eyes cannot see. Nonetheless, what's very, very interesting is that in the past 70 or 80 years or so, they took this atom and succeeded in splitting it. And what came about of the splitting of the atom? A tremendous amount of energy, tremendous explosion, the atomic bomb. In other words, even though we can't see it, somehow mankind has been able to split something which is basically so small that you can barely see it. And they realize that with this power, they can destroy the world. They also realize that this is a tremendous source of power that if they harness properly and they put it to good use, it could really change the world for the better. So this was a major discovery, something which is so small, which can not be seen, nonetheless exists and it has tremendous power. With all their discoveries and with all the knowledge that they have, scientists, what they have yet to learn and yet to discover is the greatest power of all that man has. I'm not talking about God right now. The greatest power that man has. And what is that? That's a very difficult question. Most people would not think of this. But the greatest power that the human being has is the power to choose. Livchor, to choose. Tremendous power. And this power is related to our topic, spirituality, the fifth dimension. This power one cannot detect through any kind of tool or microscope, but it can be seen. The results of this power can be seen. We can experience this power, the spiritual power, the ability to choose, to make decisions in life that are consequential. I want to quote to you what a famous psychiatrist, neurologist by the name of Viktor Frankl wrote. He was a Holocaust survivor. And he had all kinds of ideas about human psychology. But he changed his mind after what he experienced in the Holocaust. He was in a camp. Very educated, very learned individual. Not religious. But he noticed something very unusual. You know what went on in the camps, some terrible things went on. Terrible, terrible brutality. There were some human beings that were behaving worse than animals. So cruel. There were others, the victims, who had given up hope of living. But then for some reason, Viktor Frankl could not understand how come there were a few, not too many, angels. What is an angel? He saw an individual giving away his last piece of bread to another individual. Why should he do so? This is his last piece of bread. Doesn't he want to survive? He could not understand it. Cruelty he saw everywhere he went. People despairing, he understood. But to be kind and generous and to empathize with somebody else, to be so sensitive, even when you see the terrible brutality around you, what is this all about? And he came to the following conclusion. We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man. But one thing you can't take away from him: the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Those few individuals made a choice. They chose to be kind-hearted. They didn't have to, but it was up to them. It was not human anatomy. This is not biology. If anything, human beings biologically are a little bit more selfish. They care more about themselves. That is normal. This was not normal. What do you attribute this to? And this had a tremendous impact on his way of thinking. And the question is, how did they come to that decision? What made them make this kind of a decision? His conclusion is that for some people, life has meaning and purpose. And for those who life has meaning and purpose, they behave differently. As he says, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. A person who lives a meaningless life, no meaning, no purpose, is going to behave very differently than one who understands what life is all about, the purpose of life, what is his mission. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning that became a bestseller. Millions of copies were sold because it changed the way of thinking for a lot of people who were more educated by the Freudian way of thinking. That it's all about molecules. It's not all about molecules. The human being is much more complex than that. There's something else to this physical body that we call the neshama, the soul. The ability to make decisions does not come from molecules, random molecules. If anything, those molecules are interested in survival. But here he saw an example of someone who thought of another. Where is that coming from? Is that from evolution too? Life has meaning. And for those who have meaning in their life, obviously we see how they behave very, very differently, especially during these kind of circumstances. Whoever believes in God has an easier time understanding that life has meaning and purpose, and that the creation of the world did not just come about without informing mankind what this is all about. We believe that God somehow revealed to humanity and to the Jewish people the purpose of life. It does not make sense to create a world and to place man in this world, figure it out all on your own. Doesn't make sense. We believe that somehow, whoever created the world, in other words God, also gave man the ability to understand what this is all about. But he can never know everything there is to know. Impossible. We don't live long enough, and even if we were to live 1,000 years, we would never be able to figure it all out because we never saw the blueprint. So much goes on in life, so much goes on in this world. It is impossible for us to fathom, to comprehend everything there is. Who wanted to know everything? Or who wanted to know more than the average individual? Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. What did he say to Hashem? What did he say to God? Hodi'eni na derachecha. Please share with me. I want to know how you do business. How you conduct yourself. Why this? Why that? I have a lot of questions. Har'eni nat kevodecha. Let me see your glory. Moshe, the greatest prophet that ever lived, wants to have a better understanding of what's going on. And what is Hashem's answer to him? I'm sorry. Ki lo yir'ani ha'adam v'chai. It is not possible for the human being while he's alive to know me. Once you leave this physical world, you are able to see more and to know more. But while you're alive, dressed in the physical body, you're limited. Your mind is limited. You cannot possibly know everything there is to know. If you wonder why, I like to explain it as follows. For those of you who studied a little bit Kabbalah, you may be familiar with the term tzimtzum. When God revealed himself in this world, in his creation, he did everything b'tzimtzum, or through tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means contraction, constriction. That tremendous light that the Kabbalah explains, that emanates from God, had to constrict itself to create a physical world that has limits. This light, which is limitless, and sof, had to be mitztamtzem. It had to constrict itself. In the same way that God's revelation and creation in the physical world is in its tzimtzum, so is the da'at, so is the human mind, the knowledge that we have, that he imparted us, mitzumtzam, it's limited, very simple. Everything in the physical world is therefore limited. It's not that we are able to know everything there is. However much God wants us to know, that is how much we will know. A lot of people say that this does not make sense. The human being supposedly is smart enough. He's endowed with great intelligence. He should be able to understand everything there is. Where can we easily see this limitation? Very simple. As one rabbi told one of the Roman emperors, I think it was, you want to see God? Just go out and look at the sun. As soon as he raised his head to look at the sun, he had to turn away. He couldn't stare at the sun. He says, you can't even look at the sun, which is just one small creation in God's universe. You want to see him? You want to know him? At the sun you can't look for too long. It's very dangerous. What do we do if we want to nevertheless see the sun? We use filters. There are filters if you want to see a solar eclipse. If you want to see the planets, there are various color filters as well to see more detail. So in astronomy, there's all kinds of filters that are used to be able to see that which is not easily seen. In the same way that in this physical world, we sometimes have to use all kinds of special tools to see and to detect certain forces, the same thing with the spiritual world. It needs to happen in a filtered way. It's not possible for us to see it directly, but we can experience it. People have had spiritual experiences that they cannot explain in any physical way. So this is I call this a form of filter, or an indirect way to be able to see that which cannot be seen, that which is not visible. Yes, but through special filters, or in an indirect way, you can not see it, but you can experience it. So we know it exists. What is the name of that filter or that tool that enables us to experience spirituality? Anybody know? That filter is called the neshama, the soul. The soul is able to experience spirituality, not the physical body. The physical body is physical. It enjoys a piece of steak, right? Or gondi, right? Whichever you prefer. In Mexico, we like quesadillas. Depending on which country you're from, you enjoy certain foods. You relate to them, you like them, they're tasty. The neshama has nothing to do with this. The soul speaks a different language than the body. It has different needs. And it's through this soul that we are told that is in the body from the moment of birth that we're able to experience something completely different than that which we're used to with the physical body. Besides the soul, there's two additional ways that a Jew is able to know certain things from the spiritual world. Through the Torah. The Torah is a guide on how we should live our lives. And we are told that if we live our lives according to this guide, according to this set of rules, we will experience a certain uplifting. We will be stimulated in a very, very unique way. We will feel very, very different on Shabbat, for example, when we rest and abstain from physical work. These are spiritual experiences. Plus, there was a historical occurrence, a major event that occurred over 3,000 years ago. The only time in history where God revealed himself to an entire nation. Millions of people witnessed this revelation. This revelation will come about once again when Mashiach comes. Until then, there's a little bit of a concealment. But once upon a time, there was a revelation. So through this revelation, obviously, they witnessed, observed, experienced God. So other than the neshama, that's all we have. But this neshama is something that applies to all of humanity. Everybody has a spirit. And it's through this spirit that we're able to connect, relate to the spiritual world. There are those who claim that unless they can logically reason, unless they can use their mind to comprehend something, they don't believe in it. In other words, the mind, according to them, logic and reason are the only tools by which one can detect or see or evaluate if something exists or not. And here we are claiming, no, there's something beyond reason, beyond logic. And that's something very difficult for many people to understand. There's something beyond. On that, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov famously said, "Efo she'asechel v'higayon nigmar, sham matchila ha'emunah." Wherever the sechel, the mind, and logic end, and they end at a certain point, that is where faith begins. In other words, there are certain things that you have to just believe, that the mind cannot comprehend. And if you insist on figuring out everything with this mind and with logic, you're going to be missing out a big part of the picture. There's a great deal of detail that the mind cannot see, the mind cannot comprehend. That has to do with faith and spirituality. Why? Very simple. Because in the area of spirituality, there are different laws. And what most people are used to are physical laws. Well, the physical laws don't apply to that which is spiritual. This neshama has different rules. Do you know that when you're asleep, you can go to Spain and come right back in a few seconds? How is that possible? You're traveling in your sleep, a dream. In a dream, almost everything is possible. How come? Because there are no physical laws controlling this dream. Whether it's true or not, we're not going to say right now, because of course a lot of dreams are part of our imagination. But imagination is also powerful. It is through imagination and through creativity that artists can accomplish a lot. That even major inventions were discovered, major discoveries were made as a result of this creativity. So the mind is very creative. It can imagine things. Therefore, different laws that govern that which is not physical, which we call spirituality. For those who've learned a little bit of psychology, in psychology, there's something called cognitive or cognition, a certain awareness. But it's not just awareness, it's a way that we use our mind to evaluate or measure comprehension, knowledge, memory, judgment, reasoning. It's called cognition. But cognition does not account for emotions. Where does happiness, sadness, love, where do they come from? That's not in the mind. So some want to call it affective. That's the affective part, the achelik harikshi, as we call it in Hebrew. Yes, it's true, it is emotion, it is affective. Yeah, but where does it come from? What stimulates it? What brings about these kind of feelings? It's not in the mind. It's in the neshama, we are told. It's part of the soul. The soul is the one that can express those kinds of intense feelings of love for someone, or hate, or anger. Sadness and happiness, where do they come from? Of course, there are certain physical things that happen in life that bring them about, but where is it coming from? Why does the human being become sad or happy? What's happening? Is it in his body? Something going on in his body? No. There's something more spiritual there. The neshama is happy, the neshama is sad. And we'll be talking about these things in the coming weeks. Where do we see this? Do we have proof of this? When we talk about music, we'll be explaining how this relates to the neshama, not to the physical body. Music does not affect my hands, my mouth. It affects the soul. That's why I called it the language of the soul. But it's a fascinating world, the world of music. There's so many kinds of instruments, whether it's a string instrument or whether it's a flute, wind instrument or string instrument. They all have different kinds of sounds, and they all have different kinds of effect on altering people's moods. And every country has had its own kinds of instruments, which is fascinating. Many, many kinds. And we'll talk about that separately. But this, again, is a stimulus to the neshama, not to the physical body. So these are examples. I just gave you a couple examples of that which is spiritual in nature and not necessarily physical. There are certain sensations, certain feelings that people have or express that are coming directly from the neshama, from the soul, and not from the physical body. Okay, now that more or less we have some idea of what spirituality is, did you ever ask yourself, how come spirituality is something that was more common or more known or more pursued in the Far East? Tibet, India, right? China. Why are they more interested in these things? And if you look at their religions, which by the way I have a whole lecture just about religions of the world, if you look at what their teachings are all about, whether it's meditation or not, you find a big emphasis on spirituality. Not so much about rules of conduct, but about all kinds of meditation and all kinds of practices that can enable a person to reach a certain level of awareness and tranquility. I'm not going to get into details right now about it, but you understand what I mean. The Far East religions and traditions put a great emphasis on the spiritual part of the human body. Why they more than the Europeans? Why didn't we see such religions or beliefs and traditions coming out of Sweden or any other country in Europe? Why in the Far East? So our tradition, the Jewish tradition, says very clearly, it was Avraham Avinu. It was Abraham who taught it to them. It was his children, it was his disciples that traveled there and began it all. And it's interesting because if you read history, you will see that the time that this is evolving, the time that this is coming out, is around the time of Avraham Avinu, and later, because Zoroaster was later, Zartosht. So you have a tremendous movement that even though they are all interpreting their experiences differently and teaching different methods of becoming more spiritual, it's all coming from the same source. It's beginning with Avraham Avinu. Europe, well, who lives in Europe? A lot of Amalek moved to Europe. And who's Amalek? Amalek is the one that preaches materialism. Physical world. You only live once. Enjoy it. This is the philosophy of Amalek. Esav. Even though not every European country comes from Amalek, but there's a lot of Amalek in Europe. And that's why, that's the school of thought that reigns there until this very day. That's the emphasis. Enjoy your life. All the pleasures you can think of. So obviously, if that's their philosophy, you can't expect spirituality to compete. No competition whatsoever. Comes along Judaism and says, but wait a minute, the two of them are wrong. The two of them are wrong? Yeah. You see, the Far East, even though they realized that there's something called spirituality, and they're definitely were seriously searching for how to maximize this power, they did not always get it 100% right, because they said that's all there is. You have to emphasize spirituality, and in order to do that, you got to control, completely put a limit or a control or subdue that which is physical. In other words, physicality should be completely subdued. Completely. Even though there are differences between them, the various beliefs in the Far East, but generally speaking, they took spirituality a little bit to an extreme. Whereas in Europe, they took physicality to an extreme. That's all there is. The physical body. Comes along Judaism and teaches, no, there needs to be a balance. A healthy balance between the two. We need the two of them. We need to live a normal life. We have a physical body. We have a neshama too. The two of them are important. And you need to know the balance. And if you know the balance between the two, you will be a very successful individual. You'll be able to have a happier existence in this world. A balance. And that is something which is lacking in many people's life. Either they have too much physicality and no spirituality, or it's completely all spiritual, which is very, very nice, but it's painful too. The body needs to rest. The body needs to eat normal. Judaism is against what's called asceticism. We need to get married, have children. There needs to be a relationship between a husband and a wife. This is normal, but you have to know the balance. There are those that thought that what makes a person very successful, or what his chances of success are greater if he has a high IQ. You know what an IQ is, right? Many, many years ago, they thought that IQ is the ultimate test that can reveal the potential for this individual's success or not. The higher the IQ, the better. What they did not realize is that the IQ does not tell you everything about the individual. IQ will not reveal to you about his faith, about his love, and about his devotion. That you can't tell from an IQ. And by the way, there was a study done that the people with the highest IQ were usually not the most successful ones. There were some people who had a lower IQ were much more successful than those with a higher IQ. So IQ is not a way of measuring potential for success. He may be brilliant, maybe a genius. But what about love? What about devotion? Will he make a good husband if he has an IQ? This has nothing to do with IQ. So what is the way of creating this balance? The Torah tells us that we have to have both. But what is the way that the Torah teaches us to create a perfect balance where there's harmony between the two? Lekadesh tachomer. We need to sanctify that which is physical and material. We eat, we make a blessing before we eat. We finished eating, we make a blessing after we finished eating. Husband and wife, during a certain amount of days during the month, they are apart. There's no intimacy. Shabbat is sanctified one day a week. There are many areas in a Jew's life that are sanctified. What is he sanctifying? The physical world. He's using it, but in a holy way. He realizes that this is important, but this is not it. This is not necessarily the priority. There's something else in life called the neshama. It needs its attention too. I need to find a good balance between the two. I need to devote time to the neshama, to the soul, to take care of her needs, and to the physical body too. You can't deprive your physical body. It's wrong. It's a surah. It's against the Torah. The Torah says, be very careful with your physical body. Be very careful with your life. That physical body is a vessel that Hashem gave us, which contains this neshama. There are a lot of people who have left this world before their time. They were meant to live to 75, to 80, but because they didn't take care of the body, they left early. What a shame, what a loss. They could have done a lot more. They could have accomplished so much more had they taken care of their body. So in some ways it sounds strange. What do you mean? Got to take care of the body. Isn't the neshama more important? Of course, the neshama is the captain of the ship. It's the one that makes the decisions, along with the body that has to follow. But we need them both. If the physical body is not going to be healthy, how are you going to be able to perform mitzvot? How are you going to be able to function? So what is necessary is a proper balance. But to be able to have a proper balance, one needs to have a certain awareness that this neshama is for real. Otherwise, why should he bother learning? Why should he bother dedicating a certain amount of his time to refine his character? What's that going to do for him in life? There has to be a certain awareness of the importance of this, and that comes with learning. What happens to someone who does not have any spirituality? So, a great rabbi once said, Rabbi Sal Salanter, Me'at sechel tovea biyam retzonot u'tshukot. Me'at sechel means a small mind, a little bit of intelligence. If that's all there is, it will drown in the sea of desires and passion. Human beings have tremendous desires and passion, some more than others. But he has sechel, he has a mind, he's very intelligent, yes, but that little intelligence in him will drown. You want some proof for that? Some of the greatest philosophers were known to be very corrupt. One of them was caught in the act of doing something very not nice. His name, I think, was Hippocrates. That's where the word hypocrisy comes from. And so they saw him. Sir, you've been preaching against this, and here we see you do this. Do you know what he answered? He says, do as I say, not as I do. Do as I say, not as I do. You know, how could you have two standards? Now comes the big question. Okay, so the human being has these two extreme, different entities, I guess we can call them, the physical body and the soul. But why is there such a big contradiction between them? Wouldn't it be nice if there was peace? They would both agree. Human beings, we just saw an example of one, a contradiction in his life. He's preaching the truth. He knows it. He believes it. And how come he doesn't behave like that? For this, we have to turn to the Kabbalah. And only by knowing a little bit about spirituality can people appreciate this. Because you don't see this, but the Kabbalah teaches this. There are two powers in every human being, two very different powers. One is the koach ha-mekabel and one is the koach ha-mashpia. God created man with the ability to receive and with the ability to be a giver. Just look at the human body. It needs to eat. That's receiving food. There are what we call needs. The needs are the koach ha-mekabel. If you go out without food and drink for a while, you die. That's the way the body works. The body is the koach ha-mekabel. It needs to receive. It enjoys receiving. It has pleasure. It derives pleasure from many things in life. Koach ha-mekabel. It's receiving. The neshama is the koach ha-mashpia. The soul is the power of giving. The soul is a chelek eloka mima'ala. It is a part of God. It is divine. That which is divine is unselfish. It is loving. It wants to give. That's a pure neshama. A pure neshama, meaning that's all it thinks about in reality. So when these two come together, you have a conflict because the two are very different. They represent different kochot in nature, different powers in nature. But what do we see from all of this? That it is possible for the human being, if he chooses to, as the first example I gave you from the story of Viktor Frankl, if he chooses to, he's able to be a giver and not a taker. Unfortunately, there are too many people that are more takers than givers, and I'm sure you know people like that. What's missing? Meaning and purpose in their life, spirituality. They're totally unaware that there's something else besides themselves. What can really help a person be able to become more of a giver than a taker? What can help him be a little bit more balanced? What we call in Hebrew shlita al atzmo. He has to have self-control. A person has to succeed in gaining self-control. If you gain self-control, you've gone a very, very long way in achieving peace, in achieving happiness, in achieving many, many things in life through something called self-control. I'm not even talking about diet, losing weight now. I'm talking about discipline a little bit, but it's called self-control because what are we trying to control here? We're trying to control the animal within us, the physical part of us. So self-control is part of it. If we want to be able to have proper balance, that's what we need. But in order to have self-control, you need something else, and that's called responsibility. We have to understand that we are accountable for our actions, that we are responsible. And there's another quote that Viktor Frankl said that I think is very, very important, that gives tremendous amount of clarity as to why freedom, as beautiful as it is also dangerous. Freedom, something that we value, something that this country is all about. So this is what he said. Freedom, however, is not the last word. Freedom is only part of the story and half the truth. Freedom is but the negative aspect of the whole phenomenon, whose positive aspect is responsibilities. In fact, freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibilities. And you know what he recommended after he said this? When he came to the United States and he saw the Statue of Liberty, freedom, liberty, right, on the East Coast, he says, I highly recommend that on the West Coast, meaning California somewhere, they build a statue of responsibility. There is an organization that is trying to make the statue come about. There's a Statue of Liberty, very, very nice. But you need a statue of responsibility. He's very, very right. Responsibility, accountability. But this cannot happen. It will not happen if people do not realize that there is meaning and purpose in life. Look at the way people drive in an irresponsible way. You think they value life? If they valued life a little bit more, they'd be a little bit more careful with their life and with other people's lives. What's missing there? Responsibility. Some of them don't care if they get a ticket because they can pay the ticket. So what's missing? Responsibility. No self-control. Enjoy it. I want to get there fast. Yeah, you may get to the grave fast too. What is this? Completely irresponsible. Same thing with marriage. There's a lot of irresponsibility in many relationships. When you got married, what were you thinking? When you buy a house and take a mortgage, what are you thinking? Are you thinking of defaulting right away? Hopefully not. Nobody would want to lend you money. But look, Hashem lends us this physical body, gives us a soul, gives us a chance at life. He says, I wish you well. Do your best. But remember, you have a neshama, you have a soul. And that soul means responsibility, accountability. What's missing is awareness. Awareness is something that, of course, even before responsibility, is something that people are lacking. And awareness is something that has to be taught, because life today is very fast-paced. People don't have the time to stop and think, well, wait a minute, what is life all about? Is there really meaning and purpose? Nobody told me. So we have the Torah, so we can see it's all there. And even if we know it and we see it, you have a lot of people who are very knowledgeable in Torah and still don't stop to think about what is a real priority in life and what is not important. To many people, money has become a god. It's physical. It's totally not spiritual. It's the other end. It's the other extreme. Why? How can somebody make money a god? Because he has no spirituality in his life. He may be even aware that he has a soul, but does not give him any attention whatsoever. So that's what it will take in order for people to succeed. The key to succeeding in life is that awareness that there's a fifth dimension called spirituality. I called it the fifth dimension because it is another dimension. It is a very, very different dimension. We live in a three-dimensional world. But in this three-dimensional physical world, there are additional dimensions. We'll be talking briefly about angels and demons and all kinds of powers that most people do not necessarily relate to, like witchcraft. You mean there is something like witchcraft, like an evil eye? There is something like that? I mean, you don't see it, except maybe in a movie or something. There are a lot of powers out there, a lot of powers that exist that people sometimes do not understand what happened to them, and that it may have something to do with another dimension. So that is why I felt that this is a very important area to cover, spirituality, because this is a very important part of our life. It's really another half of our life, where we deal with people on a human level, not necessarily on a physical level of shaking their hands or looking at them, but in relating to them, relating to people, husband and wife, friends. It has to do with being aware of a certain dimension that does not exist in the physical world and that follows different laws. And these laws, of course, are in the Torah, and those who study these laws, I have no doubt that will gain a greater awareness of the meaning and purpose of life. Those who do not study Torah, those who don't have that benefit of studying the Torah, nevertheless can still gain tremendous clarity and awareness by being more sensitive to their soul, by paying attention to themselves and realizing that, wait a minute, there's something else here other than my personal physical needs. But in order for them to do that, they have to stop and think, and that's something that people are not doing enough. So that is why we live in a world today of fast food and pleasure seeking and vacations and cars and trips and all, which is all physical, which unfortunately what it does is it creates a greater concealment of the beauty that there is in this world that is in the spiritual form. So much beauty there that is completely lost. And that is why the prophets describe the end of days, Acharit Hayamim, as darkness. Why darkness? There's so much light. Yeah, but that's just the visible light. Everything else is dark. Nobody sees it, nobody pays attention. But there's so much else going on besides this physical and visible light. But they're completely lost. So many people are lost, and that is why there's so many divorces, and so many problems, and so much suicides, depression, drugs, all kinds of addictions. Why? Why now more than before? Now everything is a lot easier than before. Before it was so primitive. Because the physicality has taken over. Years ago there was less physicality. So a little bit more of a balance. People had a hard time. People struggled. Now physicality took over. And the more money you have, you better be careful, because that means God gave you greater responsibilities in how to use that money, and it's not easy. That is what Shlomo Melech said in Mishlei, Resh va'osher al titen li atrifeni lechem chuki. Hashem, please don't give me poverty or wealth. Don't give me any of the two extremes. Just give me enough food to survive. It's a big challenge. It brings about more, it requires more responsibilities of the individual. What am I going to do with all this money? That is why I don't buy a lottery. Could you imagine if you win $300 million? What are you going to do with it? A lot of people told me, Rabbi, just give me the money. I'll worry about what to do with it later. It's not so. Responsibility comes with money. Responsibility comes with life. Don't take it so easy. I mean, life is very, very serious. So much can be accomplished. The human being has been able to take an atom and split it and devise so much power with which he can destroy the world. Can you imagine then? He has the same power, if not more, to make this world a more beautiful place if he becomes a responsible human being. Thank you.